On November 26, 1941, a Japanese fleet of 6 carriers, 2 battleships, and hundreds of aircraft sailed toward Pearl Harbor. The attack, planned for December 7th, aimed to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet and secure Japan's expansion. Though it caught America by surprise and was tactically impressive, it proved a grave miscalculation, bringing the U.S. into the war with resolve that ensured Japan's eventual defeat. Japan's imperial ambitions. At the dawn of the 20th century, Japan had rapidly modernized its economy and military, emerging as a formidable power in Asia. Inspired by the global empires of Britain and the United States, Japanese leaders aspired to build their own empire. Such an empire would provide the natural resources, labor, and markets necessary to establish Japan as one of the world's dominant powers. Yet this ambition faced a fundamental obstacle. The Japanese islands lacked the vital raw materials needed for industrial and military expansion. Coal, iron, and most critically, oil were scarce, and without these resources, Japan could not sustain either its economy or its armed forces. In 1931, Japan seized Manchuria in northeast China, establishing a puppet state rich in coal and iron. This gave Japan a foothold on the Asian mainland and appeared to be the first step toward the empire it envisioned. By 1937, Japan escalated its ambitions with a full-scale invasion of China. At first, the campaign brought a string of victories, but it also produced brutal atrocities, such as the rape of Nanking, where tens of thousands of civilians were massacred. These actions drew international condemnation, but Japan pressed on. By 1939, however, the conflict had descended into a stalemate. Chinese resistance stiffened, and Japan found itself bogged down in a costly war that drained manpower and supplies. The more the war dragged on, the more desperate Japan became for new sources of fuel and raw materials. America watches from afar. On the other side of the Pacific, the United States watched events unfold with growing concern. In the aftermath of World War I, Americans had embraced isolationism, determined to avoid the entanglements of European or Asian conflicts. This sentiment was reflected in a series of neutrality acts passed during the 1930s, which sought to limit U.S. involvement in overseas wars. At the start of the decade, America was firmly committed to staying out of foreign conflicts. Yet, the world grew increasingly unstable. Germany's aggression in Europe and Japan's atrocities in Asia gradually eroded public support for isolation. President Franklin D. Roosevelt recognized that the United States could not remain aloof indefinitely. In 1939, Congress revised its neutrality laws to permit the sale of arms to Britain and France, provided they paid in cash and transported the goods themselves. 2 years later, the Lend-Lease Act dramatically expanded this arrangement by allowing weapons and supplies to flow not only to Britain, but also to China and the Soviet Union, with no payment required. Although the United States was still officially neutral, it had become clear where its sympathies lay. For Japan, this was deeply unsettling, as it relied heavily on American imports for survival. The oil problem. Of all the resources Japan required, none was more vital than oil. By 1939, nearly all of Japan's oil, about 80%, came from the United States. Without it, Japan's Navy, Air Force, and mechanized army would be rendered powerless. Running out of oil would doom Japan's campaign in China and destroy its hopes for further expansion. Japanese leaders debated 2 possible strategies to solve this crisis. The so-called Northern Strategy, favored by the army, envisioned expanding into Mongolia and Siberia, regions rich in coal and other resources. However, a crushing defeat at the Battle of Khalkhin Gol in 1939 at the hands of Soviet and Mongolian forces, coupled with the signing of the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, made this option unfeasible. The alternative was the Southern Strategy, supported by the Navy, which involved seizing the resource-rich colonies of British Malaya and the Dutch East Indies. By the late 1930s, this plan became increasingly attractive. Rising tensions with the United States, Japan's move southward began in 1940, when its forces occupied northern French Indochina with the cooperation of the Vichy French government. This action effectively cut off Chinese supply routes, but it also alarmed Washington. The United States responded by imposing embargoes on exports of iron, steel, and copper, materials critical to Japan's war machine. Undeterred, Japan extended its control into southern Indochina in July 1941, positioning itself to strike deeper into Southeast Asia. This time, the United States retaliated with far harsher measures. American authorities froze all Japanese assets, preventing purchases of oil. Britain and the Netherlands soon followed, cutting off Japan from nearly all of its oil supply. Overnight, Japan lost 94% of the petroleum on which its navy and military depended. Negotiations with Washington followed, but the American government insisted on demands Japan found intolerable: withdrawal from China and an end to its alliance with Germany and Italy. For Tokyo, these terms amounted to surrender. Faced with economic strangulation and unwilling to abandon its imperial ambitions, Japan concluded that war was its only option, planning the attack. The Japanese Navy proposed a daring solution. If Japan struck first and crippled the U.S. Pacific Fleet, it could buy time to seize Southeast Asia's resources and establish defensive positions that would be difficult for America to overcome. The attack on Pearl Harbor would serve as the opening blow of this strategy. The planners envisioned a devastating surprise assault that would sink America's battleships and demoralize its public. They hoped that faced with such losses, the United States would sue for peace rather than fight a long and costly war thousands of miles across the ocean. Japan's strategy was based on speed and shock, but it also rested on a dangerous assumption: that the Americans lacked the will for prolonged conflict. December 7, 1941, the day of infamy. On December 7, 1941, at 7:55 a.m., Japanese aircraft launched a surprise attack on Oahu. Dive bombers and fighters devastated U.S. airfields, while torpedo planes struck Battleship Row. Within minutes, the USS Oklahoma capsized and the USS Arizona exploded, killing over 1,100 sailors. A second wave hit at 8:54 a.m., causing further destruction. In just over an hour, 18 U.S. warships were sunk or damaged, nearly 200 planes destroyed, and more than 2,400 servicemen killed. Yet key targets were spared. The 3 U.S. aircraft carriers were away, and vital fuel tanks and repair facilities remained intact. These oversights allowed America to recover far faster than Japan anticipated. Japan's early triumphs. In the immediate aftermath, Japan appeared unstoppable. Simultaneous attacks swept across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. Thailand quickly surrendered, while Guam, Wake Island, Hong Kong, and the Philippines fell under Japanese control. In Malaya, Japanese bombers sank 2 major British warships, the Prince of Wales and Repulse, shattering Britain's naval presence in the region. By early 1942, Japan's forces had conquered the Dutch East Indies, Burma, Singapore, New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. Within months, Japan had secured a vast new empire and the natural resources it had sought for so long. At first glance, the gamble seemed to have paid off. America awakens. Japan's attack backfired, uniting Americans instead of intimidating them. On December 8th, Roosevelt delivered his Day of Infamy speech, and Congress declared war almost unanimously. Days later, Germany and Italy followed suit, drawing the U.S. fully into the global conflict. Isolationism vanished as men rushed to enlist and industry shifted into wartime production. With vast resources and unmatched capacity, the United States, now a fully awakened giant, prepared for total war. Why Japan's gamble failed. The attack on Pearl Harbor demonstrated remarkable tactical skill, but it was fatally flawed as a strategic move. By failing to destroy the American aircraft carriers, Japan left intact the very vessels that would dominate naval warfare in the Pacific. By sparing the fuel depots and repair facilities, it allowed Pearl Harbor to recover quickly and serve as a critical base for U.S. operations. Most importantly, Japan completely underestimated America's capacity for endurance and mobilization. The assumption that Americans would seek a quick peace ignored both the industrial might of the nation and the patriotic outrage the attack would unleash. Japan had entered a war it lacked the resources to sustain, against an opponent whose strength, once fully mobilized, was overwhelming. And that brings us to the end of today's deep dive into the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan's gamble that changed the course of history. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to see more engaging history content, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next upload. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.